It all started with a tomato sandwich. Ahab had grown up in the city. He didn't know much about country living, but when he visited some of his cousins down in the valley, they took him out to the garden where he could see those ripe red tomatoes hanging heavy on the vine, warmed by the sun. They picked some of the biggest ones and brought them into the house, put them on the kitchen counter, and then they showed him how to cut off a thick half-inch slab of tomato and put it squarely in the center of a slice of white Wonder bread. And then they showed him how you have to spread Duke's mayonnaise on another slice of bread. No other mayonnaise will do, only Duke's. Some salt, some pepper, you put it together, and you make the perfect tomato sandwich. Ahab had never had one before. But when he held it up to his nose, when he inhaled the aroma of fresh bread and real mayonnaise, when he took that first bite and felt that sweet, acidic tomato flavor explode on his tongue, the surprising contrast of the textures, the warm juice dribbling down his chin, he knew that he would have to have tomato sandwiches for the rest of his life. When he got back to the palace in Samaria, he asked his chef to make one for him, but it wasn't the same. There was a lot of fanfare, a big showy presentation in which the chef rolled out a cart and lifted a silver dome from a plate. But when Ahab bit into the sandwich, he found the bread hard and crusty. The chef had put some kind of fancy Dijon mustard on there, and the tomato itself tasted like plastic. Ahab longed for the simple pleasures of Wonder bread and Duke's mayonnaise, but even more for the delicious sweetness of a vine-ripened tomato. "I can't help it," his chef complained. "You can't get good tomatoes at the store. They import them green from Egypt." So Ahab began to dream of having his own garden. He sent away for the Burpee seed catalog, and at night he would lie beside Jezebel, his wife, in their big king-size bed, reading those descriptions aloud. "Listen to this," he would say, as if he were reading poetry. "The Big Mama hybrid is an enormous plum tomato that's incredibly sweet and meaty." Or this one, "The 4th of July hybrid is the first tomato to ripen by Independence Day. Be the first on your block to pick a ripe tomato." Oh, and this one, he said, "This is the best of all. Burpee's burger hybrid is a better beefsteak. Very early to fruit, firm with succulent slices, perfect for sandwiches, grilling, or salads. Doesn't that sound delicious?" But by then she had already turned off the light on her side of the bed and put the pillow over her head so she wouldn't have to hear any more of his reading. Of course, it was too late to get started that summer, but Ahab began making plans for next year, began to scout out a location for a vegetable garden. He had his driver take him all around Samaria and down into the Jezreel Valley. There were plenty of good places for a garden, but none of them that really suited him. They were too big, too far away, too something. And then one morning, while he was putting on his robe, he happened to glance out the bedroom window and saw Naboth down there tending the vines in his vineyard and whistling while he worked. The vineyard backed right up against the palace wall, where it had always been, but it was like the nose on your face, you know, so familiar that you stopped seeing it. There it is, Ahab thought, Naboth's vineyard. It's the perfect size. It's the perfect location. All I would have to do is pull up some of those vines and plow up the ground, till it, smooth it, set out some hothouse tomato plants next spring, and before you know it, I would have all the tomato sandwiches I could eat. Without a moment's hesitation, Ahab cinched up his robe, headed down the stairs, out the back door, and into the vineyard. "Naboth," he said. "Hey, Naboth, can I ask you a question?" Yes, Naboth said, "What is it?" "Well, just out of curiosity," Ahab asked, "what would you take for this vineyard?" "What would I take for it?" Naboth said, "Well, I wouldn't take anything for it. This vineyard has been in the family for generations. These vines were planted by my great. Oh, come on," said Ahab impatiently. Just tell me. I'll pay you for it. Or I'll give you another vineyard, a bigger one. Please, name your price." But Naboth was shocked by the very suggestion. "God forbid that I sell off the family vineyard," he said. "I'm planning to pass it along to my own son someday." And then, without another word, he turned and went back to his work. But he was no longer whistling. Do you know how it is when you've been looking for a house and you find one in the newspaper that looks perfect? Right location, right size, right number of bedrooms and bathrooms, and the price that's listed seems too good to be true. You call the agent and he says, "Oh, you know, I just signed a contract on that one." Or you interview for a job that seems like it would be the perfect job for you. And you think the interview went really well, and you go home and sit by the phone waiting with your fingers and toes crossed. And then they call and tell you they've decided to go in a different direction. Or you get up the nerve to ask that girl you've been dating to marry you. And to your surprise, she says yes. And you can hardly wait. You begin thinking about the wedding and about the marriage that will follow. And then 3 months into it, she breaks off the engagement to marry your best friend. It doesn't take long to fall in love with a dream, to begin to think how your life could be different and better if only you could have this one thing. And when that dream dies, for whatever reason, the grief that accompanies that death is as real as any grief there is. Ahab hadn't wanted that vineyard very long, but he had wanted it more than anything he could remember. When he found out that he couldn't get it, he took to his bed and refused to eat, turned his face toward the wall and wouldn't talk to anyone. He wouldn't answer his telephone, his email. I know it seems a little silly to get worked up into such a full-blown pout over a vineyard, but I'm guessing that Ahab is not the only one among us who ever took to his bed because he couldn't get what he wanted. The death of a dream can do that to you, and more. For a while, Jezebel left Ahab alone, not sure what to say to him, not sure what to do, but finally she just walked in there and sat down on the edge of his bed and began running her fingers through his hair. "What's the matter, baby?" she cooed. "Tell Mama all about it." Ahab didn't say anything for a while. He was just so happy that someone had finally noticed how miserable he was. But at last he mumbled into his pillow, "It's Naboth." "What's that?" Jezebel asked. I didn't hear you. "Who?" "Naboth," he said, turning toward her. "He won't give me his vineyard. I offered to pay him for it or give him another one, a bigger one, in exchange. But that stubborn fool wouldn't even talk to me." "Well," said Jezebel, a little surprised, "aren't you the king of Israel? Don't you make the rules around here?" Imagine the nerve of a man who would say no to the king. "Listen," she said, "why don't you get up and get dressed? Maybe get a little something to eat. Why don't you let me handle this for you? I will give you that vineyard myself." And then she leaned over, gave him a peck on the cheek, and left the bedroom like a woman on a mission. She went straight to his study, took out a few creamy sheets of royal stationery and a Mont Blanc pen, and began to write this letter to the elders and noblemen of Samaria.